When my boss told me I was lucky to even work there after I asked for a raise, I never imagined that 3 months later I'd be signing a lease for the office space directly across the street from her window. But sometimes the universe has a funny way of teaching people lessons they desperately need to learn. What happened next changed not only my career but my entire perspective on what it means to know your worth in the professional world. My name is Sarah, and I've been working in digital marketing for 8 years. I started at Morrison & Associates straight out of college, back when the company was just a small firm with 12 employees crammed into a converted warehouse in downtown Seattle. The rain was pouring that Tuesday morning when I walked into what I thought would be a routine performance review, but instead became the catalyst for the biggest career change of my life. Little did I know that this conversation would be the push I needed to discover just how much I was capable of achieving when I stopped asking for permission and started taking control of my own destiny. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to let you know that we're doing something special for our viewers. We're giving away a brand new motorcycle to one lucky subscriber who likes this video, subscribes to our channel, and comments below telling us where they're watching from. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and let us know your location in the comments for your chance to win this incredible prize. I'd been with Morrison & Associates for 5 years at that point, watching the company grow from that tiny warehouse operation to a thriving agency with 43 employees and clients across 3 states. During those 5 years, I'd personally brought in over $2 million in new business, developed 3 award-winning campaigns that put us on the industry map, and trained 6 junior staff members who were now handling their own accounts successfully. My portfolio included everything from tech startups to established retail chains, and I'd become the go-to person for clients who needed innovative solutions to complex marketing challenges. The previous year had been particularly successful for me professionally. I'd led the campaign for Pacific Northwest Bank's digital transformation initiative, which resulted in a 43% increase in online account openings and won us the Regional Marketing Excellence Award. I'd also spearheaded the launch strategy for EcoLife Products' new sustainable packaging line, helping them capture 15% market share in their first 6 months. My client retention rate was 97%, the highest in the agency, and I'd received commendations from 7 different clients specifically requesting that I remain their primary point of contact. But despite all these achievements, my salary had remained virtually stagnant. While I'd received small cost of living adjustments over the years, my base compensation hadn't been meaningfully increased since my 2nd year with the company. Meanwhile, I'd watched newer employees come in at starting salaries that were uncomfortably close to what I was earning after 5 years of proven results. The market research I'd conducted showed that professionals with my experience and track record were typically earning 20 to 30% more than my current salary. That's why I felt confident walking into Linda Morrison's corner office that morning, clutching a folder containing documentation of my achievements, industry salary benchmarks, and a carefully crafted proposal for a 20% raise that would bring my salary in line with market standards. The Seattle skyline stretched out behind her mahogany desk, gray clouds hanging low over the Space Needle, matching the storm clouds that were about to gather in that very room. I'd spent weeks preparing for this conversation, anticipating potential objections and developing responses that demonstrated not just my value to the company, but my commitment to continuing to grow and contribute at an even higher level. Linda was 48, with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. She'd built Morrison & Associates from nothing, starting as a one-woman freelance operation 15 years earlier, and gradually building it into one of the most respected mid-sized agencies in the Pacific Northwest. She wore her success like armor, complete with designer suits that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and an attitude that suggested everyone around her should be grateful just to be in her presence. I'd always respected her business acumen and her ability to spot market opportunities, but I'd started to notice a troubling pattern in how she treated requests for advancement or fair compensation from her employees. Over the past year, I'd watched 3 talented colleagues leave the company after being denied promotions or salary increases that seemed entirely reasonable given their contributions. Marcus Chin, our former creative director, had left for a competitor after being told there wasn't room in the budget for the senior-level position he'd been working toward for 2 years. Jennifer Walsh, who'd been our top account manager, had started her own consulting practice after repeated requests for additional compensation were met with vague promises about future opportunities that never materialized. Even Tom Bradley, who'd been Linda's right-hand man for 7 years, had eventually moved to an in-house position at one of our former clients when it became clear that his role would never evolve beyond what it had always been. I'd hoped that my situation would be different, that my track record of success and my obvious dedication to the company would be recognized and rewarded appropriately. But as I sat across from Linda that morning, methodically laying out my case for a salary adjustment, I began to realize that I might have been naive about how this conversation would unfold. I started by walking through each major account I'd secured, every campaign that had exceeded client expectations, and the additional responsibilities I'd taken on without any adjustment to my compensation. I showed her the Pacific Northwest Bank case study, complete with before and after metrics that demonstrated the tangible impact of my strategic approach. I presented the EcoLife product's launch results, including the market share data and the positive press coverage we'd generated. I outlined the training program I developed for new hires, which had reduced onboarding time by 30% and significantly improved early performance indicators for junior staff members. The rain drummed against the windows as I spoke, and Linda's expression grew increasingly cold with each point I made. She didn't ask questions about the data I was presenting or show any interest in discussing the specific achievements I'd highlighted. Instead, she seemed to be growing more irritated by the minute, as if my very presence in her office was an imposition she hadn't anticipated and didn't appreciate. When I finally mentioned the 20% increase, her laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. It wasn't the kind of laugh that suggested she found something amusing, but rather the kind that indicated she thought I'd said something so ridiculous it barely deserved a response. "You think you deserve 20% more?" she asked, leaning back in her leather chair with an expression that could only be described as contemptuous. "Sarah, let me give you some perspective here. You're lucky to even work here. Do you know how many people would kill for your position? How many resumes cross my desk every week from people who would do your job for half what we're paying you?" The words hit me like a physical blow. After 5 years of dedication, of staying late to meet impossible deadlines, of missing family dinners and weekend plans to ensure every client was satisfied, this was her response. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger, but I kept my voice steady as I tried to continue the conversation professionally. I'd prepared for pushback, but I hadn't prepared for such a dismissive and personally insulting response. "Linda, I understand the competitive nature of our industry," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "But I believe my track record speaks for itself. I've consistently delivered results that exceed expectations, and my salary hasn't been adjusted in 3 years despite taking on significantly more responsibility and generating substantial revenue for the company." She waved her hand dismissively, as if brushing away an annoying insect that had somehow found its way into her pristine office. "Everyone thinks they're irreplaceable, Sarah, but the truth is you're not special. You do your job, you get paid for it, and that should be enough. If it's not enough, there's the door. I guarantee you won't find anything better out there." Her tone was so condescending, so completely devoid of any recognition for what I'd contributed to the company's success, that I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same woman who had publicly praised my work at the company holiday party just 3 months earlier, who had used my campaigns as examples of excellence when pitching to prospective clients, who had specifically requested that I take on additional responsibilities because she trusted my judgment and execution. But there was more. Linda leaned forward, her expression becoming even more severe. "Let me tell you something about the real world, Sarah. I've been building this business since before you graduated from college. I've weathered recessions, lost major clients, and made payroll during months when we barely had enough cash flow to keep the lights on. You come in here with your little spreadsheets and your market research, thinking you understand how a business works, but you don't have a clue about what it really takes." She continued, her voice growing harsher with each word. "Do you think I got where I am by asking for handouts? Do you think I built this company by expecting other people to recognize my worth? No. I worked for every single thing I have, and I never once sat in someone else's office demanding more money because I thought I deserved it. The entitlement of your generation is absolutely staggering." I sat there absorbing this verbal assault, trying to process not just what she was saying but the sheer venom with which she was saying it. This wasn't a business discussion about compensation and performance metrics. This was a personal attack designed to make me feel small, ungrateful, and presumptuous for even suggesting that my contributions might warrant additional recognition. The meeting ended with her telling me to think carefully about what I really wanted, and whether I was truly committed to being part of the Morrison and Associates family. She made it clear that she considered my request not just unreasonable, but somehow offensive to everything she'd built. As I gathered my materials and prepared to leave her office, she delivered one final blow. "Sarah, I hope you understand that this conversation reflects poorly on your judgment and your understanding of your place in this organization. I'd suggest you adjust your expectations accordingly and focus on being grateful for the opportunities you've been given here." I walked out of that office feeling smaller than I had in years, questioning everything I thought I knew about my value as a professional and as a person. The rain had intensified while we were talking, and I stood in the lobby for several minutes, watching water cascade down the floor-to-ceiling windows, trying to process what had just happened. Other employees walked past me, going about their normal routines, completely unaware that their colleague had just been systematically torn down and humiliated for the crime of asking to be compensated fairly. The rest of that day was a blur of attempting to focus on client work while my mind kept replaying every moment of that conversation. I found myself analyzing every word Linda had said, wondering if there was some truth to her assessment that I was being unrealistic or entitled. Had I misunderstood my value to the company? Was I really just another replaceable employee who had gotten too big for her britches? That evening, I called my mentor, Janet Richardson, who had been my professor in business school and had become a close friend over the years. Janet had built her own successful consulting firm after spending a decade in corporate marketing, and she'd always been someone I could count on for honest advice and perspective. I'd respected her opinion since my graduate school days, when she'd pushed me to think more strategically about my career and to always consider the bigger picture when making professional decisions. I told her about the meeting, about Linda's reaction, and about how defeated I was feeling. I shared every detail of the conversation, including Linda's comments about entitlement and my generation's supposed lack of understanding about how business really works. Janet listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just letting me get everything out. "Sarah," Janet said after listening to my story, "sometimes the best thing that can happen to us is having someone show us exactly who they are and how little they value us. It forces us to make decisions we might never make otherwise." She paused, and I could hear her tapping her pen against her desk, a habit I remembered from her lectures. "Tell me, what would you do if money weren't a factor? If you could design your ideal professional situation?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on trying to advance within Morrison and Associates, so invested in making things work within the existing structure, that I hadn't really considered alternatives. I'd fallen into the trap of thinking that success meant climbing the ladder at whatever company I happened to be working for, rather than considering whether that particular ladder was worth climbing at all. But as Janet waited patiently for my answer, ideas began bubbling up that I hadn't allowed myself to seriously consider before. What if I could work with clients who truly valued innovative thinking? What if I could build campaigns without having to justify every creative decision to someone who saw marketing as nothing more than a necessary expense? What if I could create an environment where talented people were recognized and compensated fairly, where professional growth was encouraged rather than dismissed as entitlement? "I think," I said slowly, feeling the words take shape as I spoke them, "I'd want to start my own agency. Focus on clients who understand that great marketing requires investment and trust. Build a team where people feel valued and have real opportunities for growth, where success is shared rather than hoarded." "Then maybe," Janet replied, "it's time to stop asking for permission and start taking action." That conversation was the turning point, but it was also just the beginning of what turned out to be a much longer and more complex process than I had initially imagined. Over the next week, I started researching what it would take to launch my own digital marketing agency. I discovered that the legal requirements were more manageable than I'd expected, but the financial considerations were significant. I'd need enough capital to cover at least 6 months of office rent, equipment, insurance, and my own living expenses while building a client base. I spent hours researching business licenses, insurance requirements, and potential office spaces. I read everything I could find about small business financing, from traditional bank loans to alternative funding sources. I analyzed the competitive landscape in Seattle's digital marketing sector, identifying gaps in the market where a smaller, more agile agency might have advantages over larger, more established firms. Most importantly, I started reaching out to former colleagues who had moved on from Morrison & Associates to other opportunities. What I discovered was both encouraging and eye-opening. Almost everyone I spoke with had similar stories about feeling undervalued and underpaid at Morrison & Associates. Several mentioned that they'd considered making their own entrepreneurial leap, but had been too intimidated by the financial risks and the complexity of starting a business from scratch. The breakthrough came when I discovered that 3 of Morrison & Associates' biggest clients had been expressing significant frustration with the service they'd been receiving. Through my network, I learned that Pinnacle Technologies, a software development company that accounted for nearly 15% of our agency's revenue, had been complaining about delayed deliverables and poor communication. Their CEO had apparently told someone at a networking event that he was actively considering switching agencies because he felt like his account was being managed by people who didn't understand his industry or his company's unique challenges. Creative Minds Studio, an architectural firm that had been with Morrison & Associates for over 3 years, felt like their account was being handled by junior staff with minimal oversight. They'd specifically mentioned missing the level of strategic thinking and creative problem-solving they'd experienced during their early campaigns, which I had personally managed before being moved to other accounts. Mountain View Restaurants, a regional chain with 12 locations, had actually asked Linda directly if they could work primarily with me on their campaigns, only to be told that wasn't how the agency operated. The owner had expressed frustration that every time they had a meeting about their marketing strategy, different people from our team would attend, and there seemed to be no continuity or institutional memory from one conversation to the next. These revelations made me realize that Morrison & Associates wasn't just undervaluing its employees, it was potentially failing its clients as well. The company's focus on minimizing costs and maximizing efficiency had created a situation where client relationships were suffering and talented staff members were leaving rather than fighting to improve things from within. I spent the next month carefully documenting everything I could legally take with me if I decided to start my own agency, which meant focusing on the relationships I'd built and the skills I'd developed rather than any proprietary information or client lists that belonged to Morrison & Associates. I researched the legal and ethical boundaries around client relationships, consulting with an employment attorney to make sure I understood my obligations under my current contract. I also started having very careful, very professional conversations with key contacts at companies I'd worked with, letting them know that I was considering making a change and asking if they'd be willing to serve as references for future opportunities. I was scrupulous about not soliciting business or making any promises about future services, but I wanted to gauge whether the relationships I'd built were truly with me as an individual or simply with Morrison & Associates as an institution. The response was better than I could have hoped. Not only were people willing to serve as references, but several expressed genuine interest in potentially working with me if I were to start my own firm. They mentioned frustrations with the increasing bureaucracy at Morrison & Associates, the feeling that their accounts were being handled by too many different people without adequate coordination, and a desire for more strategic thinking in their marketing approach. David Chun from Pinnacle Technologies was particularly direct in his feedback. "Sarah, you were the only person at Morrison & Associates who really understood our business," he told me during a coffee meeting. "When you were managing our account, we felt like we had a true partner who was invested in our success. Lately, it feels like we're just another line item on someone's spreadsheet." Rebecca Martinez from Creative Minds Studio echoed similar sentiments. "The work we're getting now isn't bad, but it lacks the creativity and strategic insight that made our early campaigns so successful. We keep asking for the level of thinking we used to get, but we're told that's not how they operate anymore." These conversations confirmed what I was beginning to suspect, that Morrison & Associates' approach to client management was creating vulnerabilities that a smaller, more relationship-focused agency could exploit. But more than that, they made me realize that I had developed genuine professional relationships that existed independently of my current employer. 2 months after that disastrous meeting with Linda, I had a comprehensive business plan, startup funding from a combination of personal savings and a small business loan, and tentative commitments from 4 potential clients who had expressed strong interest in working with my new agency. The business plan included detailed financial projections, a marketing strategy for acquiring new clients, and a staffing plan that would allow for sustainable growth over the first 2 years. I'd found office space in a beautiful converted brick building just 2 blocks from Morrison and Associates, with large windows that offered a clear view of their building across the street. The building had been renovated by a developer who specialized in creating workspace for creative professionals, and it housed several small businesses including a graphic design studio, a video production company, and a boutique PR firm. The community aspect was appealing, as it would provide opportunities for collaboration and referrals. The space I'd chosen was perfect for a small agency, with room for 6 workstations, a conference room large enough for client meetings and presentations, and a kitchen area where team members could collaborate informally. The rent was reasonable, especially considering the location and the quality of the renovation, and the building's management company was offering incentives for new businesses, including reduced rent for the first 6 months and assistance with build-out costs. Most importantly, it felt like a place where creativity could flourish and where people would actually want to come to work every day. The high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and abundant natural light created an environment that was both professional and inspiring. I could envision client meetings in the conference room, brainstorming sessions around the kitchen table, and the kind of collaborative energy that I'd been missing at Morrison and Associates. I decided to wait until I had everything completely lined up before giving my notice. I wanted to be absolutely certain that this transition would be successful, not just for me, but for any clients who chose to make the move with me and for the team members I hoped to hire. The last thing I wanted was to leave Morrison and Associates in a way that could be seen as unprofessional or that might damage relationships I'd spent years building. I spent countless evenings and weekends working on business registration, setting up accounting systems, designing a website, and developing service packages that would offer more value than what traditional agencies were providing. I researched everything from professional liability insurance to project management software, determined to build an operation that was both efficient and effective from day one. The website development process was particularly important to me, as I wanted to create something that clearly communicated the values and approach that would differentiate my agency from larger competitors. I worked with a freelance designer to create a clean, modern site that emphasized strategic thinking, creative problem-solving, and genuine partnership with clients. The content focused on case studies from my previous work and testimonials from colleagues and clients who could speak to my abilities and approach. The most challenging part of this entire process was keeping my plans completely confidential while still doing my job at Morrison and Associates with the same level of professionalism and dedication I'd always maintained. I couldn't afford to give Linda any reason to question my commitment or to suspect what I was planning. Every day, I walked past her office, smiled politely when we crossed paths in the hallway, and continued working on campaigns for clients who I hoped would soon be working with me in a very different capacity. This period of secret preparation was emotionally exhausting. I felt like I was living a double life, maintaining the facade of a committed employee while simultaneously building the foundation for a competing business. There were moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether I was being dishonest or disloyal by not telling Linda about my plans. But every time I had those doubts, I remembered her words from that devastating meeting. "You're lucky to even work here." I remembered the contempt in her voice, the complete dismissal of my contributions, and the clear message that I would never be valued appropriately at Morrison and Associates no matter what I accomplished. 3 months after that life-changing performance review, everything was finally in place. I had signed a lease on the office space across the street, received confirmation from 3 former Morrison and Associates clients who wanted to move their business to my new agency, and hired 2 talented junior marketers who were excited about joining a firm that prioritized both creativity and professional growth. The first hire was Amanda Rodriguez, a recent graduate from the University of Washington's marketing program who had interned at Morrison and Associates the previous summer. She'd impressed me with her analytical skills and her fresh perspective on digital marketing trends, but Linda had decided not to offer her a full-time position, claiming there wasn't room in the budget for additional junior staff. Amanda was thrilled to join an agency where she would have opportunities for real responsibility and professional development from the beginning. The second hire was Michael Park, who had been working at a larger agency in Portland but was looking to return to Seattle to be closer to family. He had 5 years of experience in content marketing and social media strategy, and he was particularly interested in working with smaller, more agile teams where he could have a broader impact on client success. His portfolio included work with several Pacific Northwest brands, and his approach to storytelling aligned perfectly with the values I wanted to build into my agency's culture. On a Friday morning in late November, with snow beginning to fall outside the Morrison and Associates building, I walked into Linda's office for what I knew would be my final conversation as her employee. She was on a phone call when I knocked, but waved me in and gestured for me to sit while she finished her conversation with what sounded like a frustrated client who was complaining about missed deadlines and lack of communication. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was dealing with exactly the kind of client service issues that had motivated me to start my own agency. As I listened to her making excuses and promises that I suspected she wouldn't be able to keep, I felt more confident than ever that I was making the right decision. When she finally hung up, she looked at me with the same dismissive expression she'd worn 3 months earlier, as if my presence in her office was still an unwelcome interruption to her busy schedule. "What can I do for you, Sarah? Please tell me you're not here to ask for that raise again." I smiled and placed a single sheet of paper on her desk, a professionally formatted resignation letter that I'd crafted carefully to be courteous but firm. "Actually, Linda, I'm here to give you my 2 weeks' notice. I'll be starting my own digital marketing agency, and I wanted to make sure we had adequate time for a proper transition of my current accounts." The change in her expression was immediate and dramatic. The confidence and dismissiveness drained from her face, replaced by something that looked like genuine panic. She picked up the resignation letter and read it twice, then looked back at me as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. "This is ridiculous, Sarah. You can't just start your own agency. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to build a client base from scratch? How much money you'll need to invest before you see any profit? You're making a huge mistake that you're going to regret for the rest of your career." I remained calm, keeping my voice professional and friendly despite the irony of receiving career advice from someone who had made it clear just months earlier that my professional judgment was fundamentally flawed. "I appreciate your concern, Linda, but I've done quite a bit of research and planning over the past few months. I'm confident that this is the right decision for my career." She leaned forward, and I could see her mind racing as she tried to process this unexpected development. For someone who prided herself on being in control of every aspect of her business, my resignation was clearly something she hadn't anticipated or prepared for. "Look, maybe we can discuss that raise after all," she said, her tone shifting dramatically from dismissive to almost pleading. "I know I was a bit harsh in our last conversation, but you have to understand the pressures I'm under to keep costs controlled and maintain profitability. What if we started with 10% and revisited the rest in 6 months? We could even talk about additional responsibilities, maybe a promotion to senior account director." It was fascinating to watch someone who had been so dismissive suddenly become desperate to negotiate. But the offer came 3 months too late and felt entirely hollow given everything that had happened since our last conversation. More than that, it revealed that she had always known my request was reasonable, but had chosen to respond with contempt rather than engaging in good faith. "That's very generous," I replied, maintaining my professional demeanor. "But I've already made my decision. I've signed a lease on office space, made commitments to potential clients, and hired staff members who are counting on me to follow through. This isn't a negotiating tactic, Linda. It's a business decision that I've made after careful consideration." Linda's eyes narrowed, and I could see her shifting from panic to anger as she realized that this conversation wasn't going to unfold the way she'd hoped. "What office space? Where exactly are you planning to set up this agency of yours? And what do you mean you've already hired staff?" I stood up and walked to her window, pointing across the street to the beautiful brick building where my new office was located. The snow was still falling, creating a picturesque backdrop for what I knew would be a moment I'd remember for the rest of my career. "Actually, you'll have a perfect view of my new place," I said, unable to keep a small note of satisfaction out of my voice. "3rd floor, corner unit with the large windows. I should be moved in and operational within 2 weeks. And yes, I've hired 2 excellent marketers who are looking for opportunities to work in an environment that values their contributions." The silence that followed was one of the most satisfying moments of my professional life. Linda stared across the street at the building I'd indicated, then back at me, then back at the building again. I could practically see her calculating the implications of having a former employee, someone she treated so dismissively, operating a competing business literally within view of her office window. "You can't do this," she said finally, her voice tight with anger and what I suspected was a growing sense of panic about what my departure might mean for her business. "You signed a non-compete agreement when you started here. I'll have our lawyers review your contract immediately, and if you think you can just steal our clients and our proprietary methods, you're going to find yourself in very serious legal trouble." I had anticipated this response and was well prepared for it. In fact, I'd spent considerable money consulting with an employment attorney to make sure I understood my legal obligations and rights. I've already had my contract reviewed by an employment attorney who specializes in these matters. The non-compete clause is limited to working for direct competitors in the same market segment, not starting my own business serving different types of clients. And even if it were broader, courts in Washington state have been increasingly unwilling to enforce overly restrictive non-compete agreements, especially when the employer has refused reasonable requests for career advancement. Linda's face was turning red now, and I could see her struggling to maintain any semblance of professional composure. "What about client conflicts? If you think you can just steal our accounts and use the strategies and methods you learned here—" "I would never steal anything from Morrison and Associates," I interrupted firmly, wanting to make my position completely clear. "But I can't control what decisions clients make about their future marketing needs. If any of your clients choose to work with my firm, it will be because they believe we can provide better service and value, not because of anything inappropriate I've done. And as for methods and strategies, everything I know I learned through my own experience and education, not from proprietary Morrison and Associates materials." The rest of our conversation was brief and increasingly tense, with Linda making veiled threats about legal action and industry reputation, while I maintained my professional demeanor and reiterated my commitment to a smooth transition. She demanded to know which clients I'd been talking to, which team members I'd recruited, and how long I'd been planning my departure. I answered her questions honestly, but without providing details that might compromise my new business or create problems for the people who had chosen to support my venture. When I finally walked out of her office for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of trying to gain approval from someone who would never truly value my contributions was finally off my shoulders. I was scared about the challenges ahead, but I was also more excited about my professional future than I'd been since my early days out of college. Word of my departure spread quickly through the Morrison and Associates office, and the reactions were mixed but telling. Several colleagues expressed genuine excitement for my new venture and asked if I might be hiring additional staff in the future. Others seemed nervous about what my leaving might mean for their own job security or advancement opportunities, especially if Linda's reaction to my departure was any indication of how she handled professional challenges. A few people mentioned that they'd been considering making changes themselves but hadn't had the courage to take such a dramatic leap. My decision seemed to give them permission to think more seriously about their own career satisfaction and future prospects. 2 junior staff members asked if they could use me as a reference for other positions they were considering, and 1 senior account manager asked if we could have coffee to discuss what it was like to start your own business. My last 2 weeks at Morrison and Associates were surprisingly pleasant, largely because I no longer felt the pressure of trying to advance within the company or gain Linda's approval. I was able to focus entirely on doing excellent work and ensuring that all my clients would be well taken care of during the transition. I created detailed handover documents for each account, including comprehensive client preference profiles, campaign histories with performance metrics, and strategic recommendations for future initiatives. I also made a point of meeting individually with each of my clients to let them know about my departure and to introduce them to the team members who would be handling their accounts going forward. These conversations were professional and focused on ensuring continuity of service, but they also gave me an opportunity to gauge how clients felt about the transition and whether they were satisfied with Morrison and Associates' overall approach to their business. The feedback I received during these transition meetings reinforced many of the concerns I'd heard through my network. Clients consistently mentioned that they valued the personal attention and strategic thinking I'd brought to their accounts, and several expressed worry about maintaining that level of service after my departure. While I was careful not to solicit business or suggest that they should consider alternatives, I did let them know that I would be starting my own agency and would welcome the opportunity to work with them again in the future if they ever decided to make a change. The day I officially started Catalyst Creative Solutions, my new agency, was one of the most nerve-wracking and exciting days of my career. I arrived at the office at 7 in the morning, hours before my first client meeting, making sure everything was perfect for what would be my first official day as an entrepreneur. The space looked fantastic, with modern furniture, state-of-the-art technology, and those large windows that filled the room with natural light even on a cloudy Seattle morning. Most importantly, those windows offered a clear view of the Morrison and Associates building across the street, a daily reminder of how far I'd come and what I'd chosen to leave behind. I'd arranged the office layout so that my desk faced away from that view, symbolically turning my back on the past and focusing on the future I was building. My first 3 clients were indeed former Morrison and Associates accounts who had chosen to move their business to my firm after learning about my departure. The meetings went better than I could have hoped, with each client expressing enthusiasm about working with a smaller, more agile team that could give them the personalized attention they'd been missing. They were excited about having direct access to senior-level strategic thinking and appreciated the fact that their success would be a direct priority rather than just one account among dozens. David Chun from Pinnacle Technologies was particularly enthusiastic about the partnership. "Sarah, this is exactly what we've been looking for," he said during our first official strategy session. "We want to work with people who understand our business and are genuinely invested in helping us achieve our goals." The corporate bureaucracy at Morrison and Associates was becoming a real obstacle to getting things done efficiently. By the end of my first week, I had signed contracts worth more than half of what I'd been earning annually at Morrison and Associates, and I had proposals pending with 3 additional prospects who had been referred by my existing clients. The momentum was building faster than I had anticipated in my most optimistic projections. But the real validation came 6 weeks later, when I was working late on a comprehensive campaign proposal for a potential new client and happened to glance out the window toward the Morrison and Associates building. Linda was still in her office, which wasn't unusual given her tendency to work long hours. What was unusual was seeing her standing at her window, looking directly across the street at my building. Our offices were close enough that I could see her clearly, and for just a moment, our eyes met across the distance. I gave her a small, professional wave, the kind of acknowledgement you might offer to a former colleague. She immediately stepped back from the window and disappeared from view, but the moment felt symbolically important. Here I was, thriving in the business I'd built literally within sight of the place where I'd been told I was lucky to even work. The next morning, I received a call from Janet, my mentor, who had been following my progress with great interest and pride. "Sarah," she said, "I just got off the phone with David Chun from Pinnacle Technologies. He wanted to tell me how thrilled they are with the work your team is doing for them. Apparently, you've increased their lead generation by 47% in just 6 weeks. And their cost per acquisition is down 18% from what they were seeing with Morrison and Associates." That phone call was followed by others throughout the day, from other clients, from industry contacts, and from talented professionals who were interested in potentially joining my growing team. The momentum was building in ways I hadn't anticipated, and I realized that leaving Morrison and Associates hadn't just been about escaping a toxic situation. It had been about creating something genuinely better for everyone involved. 3 months after launching Catalyst Creative Solutions, I hired my 4th team member, a senior strategist with experience at some of the top agencies in San Francisco who was excited about joining a firm that prioritized both creative excellence and genuine client partnership. 6 months in, we had 12 active clients and were turning down new business because we were at capacity, a problem I was happy to have. A year later, we moved to a larger space in the same building, taking over the entire 4th floor and offering a view that no longer included the Morrison and Associates building.